but no one actually is willing to say, call it out.
I do feel there's a growing, certainly since I've come into this space. I was obviously away doing football, but since I've come into this space, I've felt, kind of the position you take and how people attack it. You're seen as right, on the right, misogynist, as I say, everythingist or ism, added to every single label he can come up with. But I'm from Liverpool. I'm a working class lad. I am of the left. Everywhere I've been, I always consider myself socially left. I would, I wouldn't be here and have the opportunities I have if it wasn't for, the greatness of this country. And when I go through, I go, okay, we have to be careful here to protect our culture and our values because, yes, we've got some things wrong in the past, but we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be as well known and as celebrated if we were universally evil or terrible. So clearly we've done lots of good. And when I look at it now, I do worry because I'm born Roman Catholic. You don't get a choice in that.
Me too.
Yeah, born Roman Catholic. And then obviously go on your own journey of trying to learn and become an atheist. And I'm probably agnostic as we sit here today. But I'm like, what have kids got to latch onto? This is why I think Kim Kardashian, Andrew Tate or whatever, Joe Rogan, it can be really, really influential in society because the church has lost a lot of credibility from the Roman Catholic side in terms of the abuse and the child abuse that's gone on within the church and been covered up. When I seen Britain is a Protestant country, thanks to Henry VIII, and when I see the Church of England coming out and the Cardinal or whatever his name is, Cardinal Wolsey, was coming out and saying, it might be his name, they're going to pay £1 billion or whatever back as... Welby, was it? They're going to pay £1 billion or £2 billion in repatriations for slavery. And I go, the Queen passing away, and obviously a lot of people had a lot of respect for the Queen, even, I'm not pro-monarchy. I find it quite absurd, that this person's a sentient being that's better than all of us, and I don't really believe that. But what I do respect is the tradition and the history and 1,000 years, and we don't want to be a republic, because do you want to have a Donald Trump or a Joe Biden or a Saddam Hussein or a Bin Salman, what's the name, MBS, or a Putin? So we have to have somebody, I believe, to lead. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm also certain I don't want it to be a politician. So what is that? I don't know whether to trust military, because before you know it, you're involved in all...
I don't think you want to give the military the
we have to have something to build off. My grandmother used to wait on. She did civil service, my nan, and she waited on the Queen, and she always spoke about her manners and the way she was. Now, she was a working class lady from Liverpool, but I think a lot of people looked to the Queen for out of respect, how you should behave. Obviously the behaviour of the royal family, not the Queen, but other members of it subsequently has eroded that. At the same time, Church of England, Catholic Church has lost its credibility with the next generation. And the one thing I do look at other religions, especially Islam, is it teaches people be disciplined. It gives them a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, sense of community. They look after each other. They get, and they get, they get a sense of community that I feel we're losing. And as we lose that, Rafe, I think we lose, the ability to educate the next generation about what is great about this country. This is why I wanted to talk to you, because I think you speak so well about it.
Yes, you see, the secret to success in this world is to be strong and self-confident. Russia, China, these countries understand that. They're so good on the I loathe them both, but they're so good on the diplomatic field because they are strong and assertive. And the West understood that and used to meet them, eyeball to eyeball. And we simply lost the plot on all of that. We undermine our own institutions. Our institutions are also nihilistic, and they undermine themselves. And so, the Church of England has every reason, for example, I don't want to keep going back to slavery, but the Church of England has every reason to celebrate, because as you said earlier, slavery was universal for thousands of years. But what was unique was the evangelical movement in Britain, where for the first time in history, you had a group of men coming together who said, actually, slavery is morally wrong. And it was that evangelical Christian movement, and you had Edward Rutherford here, William Rathbone in Liverpool, and you had the Clapham sect in Clapham, South London. The church is still there with William Wilberforce and others. They were the ones who campaigned and lobbied and eventually got the British Parliament to abolish it. Now, that was because of their Christian belief and morality. And that Christian evangelical movement, which was very much of the Victorian times, then dominated so much of the British Empire. Now, the Church of England should take credit for that, instead of, whipping itself and wearing a horsehair shirt. But it apply, but it goes more broadly. Yeah, the Church of England used to be called the Conservative Party at prayer. I think it's now the Green Party at prayer, or it's
Monster Raven
Jeremy
Looney
Corbyn's
Party.
Momentum at prayer, or something like that. It's but the laity, the people who go to church are still so small c conservative. And here I'm not talking about Tories. I'm talking about sort of small c conservative, the red wall voters, people in the north of England who actually lent their vote to the Tories because they're small c traditionalists rather than, I'm actually, I think Thatcher did terrible things for Liverpool and so forth. And I'm just...
Yeah,
I
she's
think you're-
despised here.
Yeah, and I understand that full well. I don't think she should have sold off council houses either and not used the money to rebuild new ones. So economically, I'm actually closer to the SDP. So I'm not some sort of, what was that, the New Statesman, Alan Bastard type Tory. I hate the, Liz Truss and all these free marketeer extremists. I believe conservatism...
She was a Lib Dem, wasn't she, Liz Truss?
She's still a Lib Dem. That's the thing, right? This woman wanted to increase migration when she was Prime Minister as part of her plan for economic growth, because that's worked so well over the last 20 years for our economic growth. My conservatism is about conserving communities. The clue's in the name. So I want to conserve working class communities, conserve every strata in society, respect traditions, preserve the things the best that Britain has, rather than just sell off the assets of this country. A neoliberal Liz Truss type would build a motorway through a pastoral landscape if it made economic sense. I believe in beauty and aesthetics. That's why I want to preserve our towns and cities.
Charlie's a bit like that. King Charles now, isn't he? He's a big British countryside man, and the areas and the Duchy of Cornwall and all that, I think, attest to that, where he's been given. Before he's become king, he's obviously been given those areas to rule over, and I think when I look at it, I look at the British, the British culture that we could celebrate. It's such a great country. There's so much positive that we celebrate, and all the while we get distracted and we're pulled into these little mini confrontations, and it's divide and conquer. Our media try to divide and conquer us. That's what they do.
The problem is, of course, we don't educate our children in school in history, for example. So we have, I think, at the age of 14, you can stop studying history in this country, whereas in almost every other country in Europe, it's 15 or 16. And that's such a short period of time to study history. And then what do they study? They study the American West, they study the Second World War, and they'll study the Tudors.
Yeah,
and that's about it. And no one is actually being taught the continuous chronological history of this country and its influence on the world. And they're not being taught Western civilization. And even with that short period of learning history, they also have to do comparisons with Africa and the Mayans and somewhere in the Islamic world. And you think, gosh, all of this time should we focus on British and European history, because there's so much to teach and learn, and you cannot be an active participant in the modern world if you don't understand who we are and where we came from and why things are the way that they are. You need to have a linear understanding of how institutions evolved. And so because people, not just children, the whole of British society is so ignorant of history, it's very easy for them to believe fake history or believe biased history. And so when people, when the media only give coverage to these slurs against British people, be it, whoever you want to say, Nelson was a pro-slavery, or David Hume or whatever, of course people are going to believe it because they don't have any information or for a counter-argument, which is usually the correct one, and no one is pointing out these myths. So I think we need to actually start teaching unapologetically the achievements and the genius of Britain and Western civilization. Why West is great. Why the West is not like any other civilization in history. Why is it so unique? How did it manage to dominate the world in the space of 500 years? That needs to be an essential part of it. And once you start teaching people to have pride in their country, then I think that's where the fight back begins. And it can't be at the university level, because too much of this is about the universities. Aristotle said, give me a child of the age of 7 and I will show you the man. It's those formative years that are critical. So I've been campaigning for a long time to start teaching children history from primary school onwards. As I like to say, about university students, if the hair is blue, there's nothing you can do, right? It's far too late. You've got to start early. And also do things like, I think every student at school from the ages of 10 to 16 should be forced to take, not forced, there should be compulsory debates where you have to debate the opposite side to the one that you would normally support.
It's philosophy though, isn't it? The power of reason, arguments. I think, I went to school and they used to put religious education in there. I mean, I didn't see, after I got to a certain age, I'm like, I can't really buy this man in the sky concept. Would it have been better served taking philosophy, doing history? I did enjoy history in school, but it's one of those things where, as I say, our history isn't necessarily taught to us, because they don't teach us about the wars we've lost, whether that's the American, obviously, conflict that we were involved in, in the early part of that colony taking place, whether it's the, Cromwell taking the country and King Charles is the third, but obviously King Charles the First had his head chopped off, and I think King Charles II started the constitutional monarchy, didn't he, by accepting Cromwell's olive branch. And we're not taught that. So we always think Napoleon or the Russian, Lenin into, the Russian Bolshevik revolution with the first, mass. Yeah. And I think the more we're taught about actually what's actually happened that's gone before for us to be in the position where we were in today, I totally agree with you. I think it enables those young, fertile minds then to make the way in the world and formulate, a plan to solve it or make it work for them. But at this moment in time, we travel through filling their heads full of shit, half-truths, mistruths, misinformation. And it must be so difficult to be a young person out there when the people who are entrusted with your education are actively trying to undermine the culture that you're going to live in.
Well, it has to be said. I mean, in terms of history, I always say kids are now taught what it was like to be a soldier in the trench, but they can't name you a single World War I battle. That's where we're at. It's all about that side of things. But look, what happened with education is quite fascinating because it's actually at the root cause of so much of what we're talking about. Now, when I was at school, there was a slight right-wing imbalance in the teaching profession in secondary school and so forth. When I was at university, there were 2 liberals for every 1 conservative academic. Now it's about 13 or 14 to 1. What happened was in the 1970s, there was a decision made, law was passed to require teachers to have proper university education in teaching. And slowly what you saw was the teacher training colleges, which were quite good and effective, were closed down, and universities gradually took over the education training. And I call university departments of education woke madrasas because they are at the core. They are the beating heart of the woke movement.
Well, this Yuri Brezhnev, was that the guy who spoke?
Oh, Yuri Brezhnev, yeah.
Didn't he speak about this? That this was a kind of KGB plan to infect the universities, and I've seen Jordan. I think it's Jordan B. Peterson, but Jordan Peterson, I know him as, who spoke about 10 years ago. He was talking about the language that's getting used and the fight for language, which I think in 2024 now, Rafe, we're seeing the seeds have now turned into fully developed plants and are bearing fruit. Look at the university campuses in the States, for instance. So
Yuri Bezmenov was a Russian KGB agent who defected to the States in 1985 to Toronto.
I think Canada.
He was in Toronto. And he said it takes 20 years to demoralize and destabilize a society, and the focus is on the youth. And you can bombard them with so much information that eventually, even if they see the evidence to the contrary in front of them, they won't believe it. So he said, this was their plan to try to destabilize America, was, eventually you could take American students to the gulags in Russia, their sort of, labor camps, and even seeing it, they wouldn't believe that they existed. And we're actually getting close to that sort of a situation.
Yeah, useful idiots.
Yeah, we're getting to that sort of a situation now.
We're seeing it in London because you're getting these marches. So I look at it and go, there's somebody's useful idiots. Like I seen a picture the other day of a load of ceasefire in Palestine now, flags all like bundled together. So it's like this is not just people making them at home and feeling that,
socialist worker, all the far left, and it's the age-old story. It's like the Queers for Palestine nonsense. And we've seen these videos of chaps in Trafalgar Square and elsewhere in the world who are being pushed out of these marches because they've got a pride flag or something, and it's like it's like sort of turkeys voting for Christmas. I was like, I just remember, the Iranian Revolution was the same way, right? They wanted to overthrow the Shah of Iran. He was the king of Iran, and so the radical mullahs and the ayatollahs allied with the left liberal student population to overthrow the Shah. As soon as they had the revolution, of course, who was next? It was the liberals.
It was the same in the Soviet. The Bolsheviks obviously got rid of the Tsar and the monarchy.
History repeats itself, and why they're so ignorant and can't see this, but it's a willful ignorance on the part. I say they're useful idiots. They simply cannot see the evidence.
But this is the thing, Rafe. Like that. I got it from Peterson, but Alexander Solzhenitsyn and people who've lived through this. I had Mark Viduka on the other day, who was born in Croatia. Born in Melbourne, but Aussie Croat parents, and we were talking about when the left goes left and what happens in communism. So this is what I feel, I consider myself left of centre. Whether people now see me there, I don't care. I know where I grew up and I know what lineage and mindset I came from. And when I look at the left, which I consider myself a part of, the far left going even further left, I just go, this is just never good. This is not a good situation for anybody, because the minute they get power, which is what we're seeing, they're going to do everything they can to consolidate that. And, now with this DEI and wokeness that's creeped in, we're now putting people in positions that are not the best candidate for the job because we're petrified of being labelled a racist or being labelled a misogynist or a sexist.
Well, as we record this, Hamza Yusuf has just resigned.
He comes in.
Just resigned, right? This guy was clearly unsuited for the job, the decision to get rid of the Green Party was a complete miscalculation. No mature politician would have done what he did. It was obvious going to end this way. And he gave that famous speech about everyone being white in Scotland.
But how to lose an audience, though? 94% of the population are white.
Exactly. But then you have to ask, would he be the leader of the SNP if he wasn't actually an ethnic minority? Of course not, because if he was a white man, they would say, well, you're actually not qualified enough. And they made that exception. We just had recently Dame Sharon White, the head of John Lewis, became the shortest-lived CEO of John Lewis in its 100-year history because she basically trashed the brand and was driving it into the ground. Yeah. We are at the point now where we are prioritizing equity and identity over excellence and competence.
Well, the first big blow I seen in that was at the turn of the year when Claudine Gay was caught in a plagiarism row in Harvard and obviously lost the position. And then, I've watched it unfold from there. For me, that was... I thought that was a really big moment in terms of, America's gone really woke after the Antifa, Black Lives Matter, their institutions. So I've been tracking, obviously, America because it does have a big effect on our culture. And when I seen Claudine go, for that reason, and I'm not saying I don't know her, but clearly that's what happens if you put somebody in a job who isn't qualified, because they're going to do everything they can, legally or illegally, to stay there.
But it's the first time in history where you have institutions, and particularly corporations, deliberately self-harming in order to advance an ideology rather than the interests of their shareholders, for example. Milton Friedman famously said the sole interest of a business should be profit for their shareholders. And now they're deliberately harming themselves in order to do this. You mentioned Claudine Gay. There was a law case in America with Harvard University. What Harvard was doing was they had too few black applicants, black students, and they had too many Asian, Japanese and Chinese. And so they began to reject these highly qualified Asians on the grounds that they weren't socially compatible. It was one of the ways you could decide, oh, well, you wouldn't be a good social mix. In order to get rid of these guys, to have more, people coming from the black community. But as a result of that, how many Nobel Prize winners have they rejected? How many people who could become billionaires who might give money back to the institution? You are deliberately, diminishing the value of your institution.
You're devaluing your own brand.
Yeah.
If your brand's excellence and prestige, then you want the best candidate. I'm with you. I don't get it other than, this political kind of virtue signaling. And again, it comes from I think it's a real first world problem. I think when you get too much money, too much time on your hands, you're like, right, what can we do now to make us stand out? You know, like when I look at the campuses in America, what's happening in the last week or so, where they've obviously taken, you know, the campuses hostage, pretty much, the students in some of the big, I think Columbia's big, but some of the big American institutional universities. And I think, why? Like what in terms of, I look at it and I think they've gone, okay, we're students. We've watched the Vietnam, and they've watched all these on Netflix. They've watched all these documentaries about other students protesting Vietnam or whatever it was, and they've gone, yeah, this is our chance to be special, and we want to say when we're 40, we were protesting on the campuses. And actually, when people are going and vox popping them and interview them, they say, what are you here for? They're like, I don't know, I'm just basically coming down because we mates are down here. And then the police are going in riot gear, and what they're not realising is they get, you know, they could get suspended and get their education taken away from them when they're caring about stuff that's going on in the Middle East, which they actually really don't care about it. It's just to make themselves feel important.
Well, it's all virtue signalling.
Everything.
It's the same thing with the adverts, right? As you say, the entire board of directors is white. Everyone running the BBC is white, but that means they have to virtue signal and just do these performative gestures. But what's happening in the universities and in our institutions is part, and this is, I think, you know, our viewers need to know this. It's not by accident. You know, there's not a conspiracy, there's not a cabal of people, of Illuminati behind all of this, but there is an absolute clear movement that's started in the universities of cultural Marxism. You know, when we think of Marxism, we think about it as being an economic model. I mean, it's a class struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie.
Exploitation of the workforce.
Yeah, but you know, there's a guy called James Lindsay.
I like him. Yeah, Evergreen.
He puts it very well. He says, you know, Marxism is like the genus. You know, it's like a cat. You know, there's cats, but then there are leopards, tigers, tabby cats, right? So they're all different types of cats. Marxism is that genus, but then you have economic Marxism, which is the traditional one, but then you have radical feminism, that's also Marxist. There it's, you know, economic Marxism is about private property. Radical feminism is about masculinity. Then you get critical race theory, which is another form of Marxism, that's about whiteness. And then you get post-colonialism, which is about Western culture.
So my university professor was a Marxist.
Well,
so we had lots of interesting debates.
Well, what a surprise, a Marxist university professor.
Yeah, he's a great guy, actually. He's a Sikh, believe it or not, but yeah. Anyway.
So you know, we have to understand that Marxism comes in many forms, you know, and cultural Marxism people think is a conspiracy theory, but actually it's very real. And what happened was in the 1920s, you had, you know, a guy called Antonio Gramsci, who of course went to the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution. And he wondered why hadn't that worked in the west of Europe? Because the whole point of Karl Marx is we're going to have a revolution in Western Europe. But it only happened in feudal societies, the Soviet Union and China, rather than the industrial West. And then he realized that capitalism actually was improving the lives of people in the West, and that the working class weren't going to be the foot soldiers of a revolution, because they were actually patriotic. They were small C conservatives, like we see in the Red Wall. And so he thought, we need to change the culture. We need to have a cultural revolution. And then in the you know, I won't go through the whole story, but then you had something in Germany called the Frankfurt School. And you had academics there who were trying to find ways to create a revolution in the West, in America and Western Europe, to basically create a Marxist world. And they were focused on culture. And they also came to this conclusion about a long march through the institutions. With Marcuse, and then after the Second World War, they went, because they were German, they went to America and went into American universities. So this all started in Europe, in the Italian communists and in Germany, and they went to the American universities, and that was the birthplace of this woke revolution. And then in 1968, you had Rudi Deutscher, who was another Marxist, and he coined this phrase, we need a long march through the institutions, because there was a movement called the New Left that came into being, which was very radical. Remember the Bernhard Meinheim in Germany?
Yeah.
And they wanted violent revolution overnight. He said
Bane
no.
of Meinhof complex or
That's
something.
right,
Is that the movie or something? Is there a movie?
And,
they made a movie about
yeah,
it?
there was a couple of films made about it. But he said, no, you're not going to achieve this overnight. This needs to be a long, slow march to slowly erode Western culture, Western institutions, slowly undermine them over decades. And that's how we're going to achieve a revolution. Because revolutions don't mean flying a red flag from the rooftops and marching in the streets. You know, we are living in a post-revolution. Look around you. Which, everything we've talked about, this is not the world that we were
power,
born
isn't
into.
It? Revolution. It's seizing power, yeah.
But, you know, we can't talk about certain topics. You know, there are programs that are now taken off air. The suppression of free speech. We have wrongthink, people's tweets being policed.
I've had it in the last couple of weeks. I had a voluntary interview. I've had, in 3 days, I had 8 CID officers visit my house, 3 separate occasions, and then twice on the last day. And then I had a 2-hour voluntary interview with them over tweets.
Was this over the Fred West thing?
Yeah, over that.
I thought that was so funny, right?
Yeah, again, but they were saying I'd gone too far and basically tell me where the line was and satire and...
Well, I mean, that was a joke that you would have expected Frankie Boyle to do about 15 years ago, right? Frankie Boyle 15 years ago would have made a joke like that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, now that was early, Frank. Now he's completely different.
Yeah, he's gone woke.
But yeah, now he's a complete disgrace. But he was actually funny 15 years ago, and he could easily have come out with that joke. You know, I mean, one of my favourite jokes, you know, mainstream BBC, Les Dawson. He says, you know, I went to the pub with my mate the other day. We walked in, and there on the floor, I was shocked to see my mother-in-law surrounded by 6 burly lorry drivers, pounding her with bar stools. My friend said, "Aren't you going to help?" I said, 6 should be enough, and. I think that's one of my favourite jokes. Now, you couldn't see a comedian telling that joke today, right? But that was an innocent... No one took it seriously.
But it's like the Ricky Gervais stuff. Ricky does stuff now, and the way they go after it, I'm like... 10 years ago, like, that wasn't... I look at some of the movies made. We were laughing the other day saying, you ever remember the movie East is East?
I think so.
Oh, but it was like set in Manchester, and then there was another movie called
Was
Four
that with Keira
Lions.
Knightley in it?
No.
Beckham,
It was based on like an Indian kind of Asian family in the northeast of England, but in the northwest of England. And then you had a movie called Four Lions. They would just not be made now.
Yeah, Four Lions is good.
They just wouldn't. But it was like it was like a joke on what kind of. I think comedy and humour is a way of cutting through and being able to kind of get a serious conversation going. I think, you know. I think if we can't laugh at ourselves, well, it's why kings, and you know this better than anyone, it's why kings always had the jester around. You know, the emperor's got no clothes on.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
we need to be able to laugh at it. And the world we're living in now, for fear of somebody being offended, as I say, last week, I had 8 CID visit my house in 72 hours, and I had to go on the Tuesday for a voluntary interview, which took about an hour and 45 minutes. So that's 10 CID officers over 10 minutes, basically policing tweets. And somebody's getting offended, and I'm like, and then I'm seeing on the other scale of it, people having a sword fight, 2 machetes in the middle of London, and not a police in sight. And then I'm looking at marches every other weekend, and thousands of police there, and I'm going, is this the best use of police time and taxpayers' money?
You know, we have 2-tier policing in this country now, right? Clearly, you know,
politicised policing.
Just remember, you know, you have calls for jihad on the streets. You know, from the river to the sea, being right in front of police officers, chaps scaling scaffolding who were helped down by the police and sent on their way. At the same time, you had, you know, that Sarah Everard vigil in Clapham Common, where the police went down, you know, pushing around the women there. You know, there was an EDL march. There was a lockdown march as well, an EDL march, where they were just a few hundred people, and they had the same number of arrests as in these marches of tens of thousands of people for the Palestine March. You know, there's a clear agenda here. But in terms of Ricky Gervais and so forth, I mean, I think he gets off a bit too lightly. He and Dave Chappelle, everyone think of as free speech champions. Yet they always just go after the trans community, which is such low-hanging fruit. They never discuss Islam. They never discuss race issue, BLM, or this sort of a thing, you know. So even they have their own no-go zones that they can't go into. But yeah,
we have to be careful with Islam because they're a bit different.
That's the point. If you wanted to defend, you know, a majority of look, the point is the majority of Muslims in this country are well integrated and they're adjusted. You have to make that point clear. But they're not an overwhelming majority, because there's a very sizable minority of Muslims in this country who hold radically different views. You know, 9% of Muslims are radical extremists. That's about 400,000 people in this country who are actually who are actually terrorist supporters, and a large amount, I think 16% actually support things like Hamas and Al-Qaeda and so forth. So these are large, significant portions of the population, and you need to take account of that. And, a majority want a blasphemy law in this country. They want, to ban any display of the image of Muhammad, for example, or under Labour, you're probably going to get a new Islamophobia law coming in, which is blasphemy law by the back door. So even what I've said today will be probably criminalised under this new. And if we don't take a stand, because I'm a free speech absolutist, I don't believe there should be any limits really to free speech. You can insult me all you want to. I don't have the right not to be offended. And we need to ensure that we test this, and that means even if it risks the ire of Islam, doing it in order to say that we are braver than that. So I salute people like the French cartoonist who published that Charlie Hebdo magazine cover.
Yeah, but look what happened to them.
Yeah, but you need to take these stands. This is so vitally important. Otherwise, it's going to go.
Well, that's it. If you cower, but then that's the thing. It needs to be I think it needs to be a conscious effort.
I am Spartacus, though. Everyone
yeah,
needs
absolutely.
to do it.
I mean, the problem you've got is, as I say, once you start saying, okay, it's fine to talk about that, but like nobody can go near that, then we are in very, very touchy territory. And I do worry about certainly some of the issues we're coming up to. You've just brought me nicely onto, I've got a little topic here. I was going to take it on a little side journey of trans women, trans people in sports, certainly, so are you of the 56 genders, or are you of the 2 genders? I'm 2 genders, I believe, XY chromosome. I take on board, Rafe, anybody's sexual orientation or what they want to do. That's entirely their own business once they're an adult. I think anything to do with anybody under the age of 18, I think we have to allow them to be children and have a childhood. And then after that, they can drink, smoke, drug, whatever they want to do, go to music, eat junk food, whatever, practice whatever religion, because they're now adults. And whatever they want to do sexually is entirely their thing, as long as they don't start forcing it on anybody else.
I agree with you. I mean, I thought trans athletes were, we had Rod Little at my think tank that I'm with the New Culture Forum a few years ago, and he said, when this was all kicking off, and he said...
was he the Times, Rod?
Yeah, Spectator and the
like
Times.
op-eds.
And he said that the issue of trans in sports is peak wank. And he said, we've peaked now, and this is all going to go downhill. And that became quite a good catchphrase for the moment. But of course, that was about 5 years ago now, and we're still where we are. I have complete sympathy for people who are struggling with their gender, with their sexuality or their sexual identity. What's interesting, though, is how this movement, and it's something that I only came to realize fairly recently, actually, is how we call this a trans movement, not a transgender or transsexual movement. And this trans movement now seems to include transvestites. And people don't seem to understand that. So I have sympathy with those people who may be genuinely transsexual. But transvestites are an entirely different thing. This is a sexual fetish. The majority of transvestites...
Autogynephiliac or something like that? Is that what the technical term is?
I don't know the technical term. But yeah, a lot of the majority of transvestites are straight men, often married, and they just have this, remember the old Bounty commercial?
Just type that in, autogynephiliac. So these are men who get off and wearing women's clothes, but they don't want to become women, I think.
And the majority are actually straight men.
So a male's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought of himself as a female, but he doesn't want to be a female.
No, it's a bloke in a wig, right? Yeah. And but the problem here is that they are now included in this umbrella term of trans because it doesn't specify one or the other. And I think this is where so much of the confusion lies to a great degree, is that these characters can now go into any place just by, putting on like I said, remember that old Bounty commercial for the kitchen roll? And it was like George and Sid go, hello, George, how's the wife? And they're all in a frock, which is a very different thing to I think, the genuine issue of trans people. Now, look, I'm old enough to remember people like Jan Morris. Do you know Jan Morris? Used to be a historian called James Morris. Looked a bit like Barbara Bush. Right. Was a very nice, great historian and travel writer. Did 3 histories of the British Empire. Had his own struggles and then became a she back in the 1970s or 80s. No agenda there, and lived a very happy life as a woman.
Was she going in trying to use women's toilets and women's changing spaces?
No, but there wasn't. I don't know. No, it wasn't an issue or anything else. I'm sure they probably didn't. When you disabled or whatever, someone like Caitlyn Jenner, right? seems to be
Bruce Jenner,
Bruce
now
Jenner
Caitlyn Jenner.
seems to have a perfectly, is also opposed to this trans movement, right? But she seems to be perfectly content with what they went through. So if they're adults and they're happy, it brings them happiness.
But did you see? Sorry to cut you there, Andy. Right? Did you see Caitlyn Jenner? So I think she. I'm struggling with it. Has given a really balanced opinion on that trans thing, and basically, he said he got asked because he's a keen golfer. Obviously, was he pentathlon or heptathlon or something? When he was an Olympic athlete as Bruce. Yeah. And he said he gets invited to, because he's Caitlyn now, at his golf club. He can play in the women's competitions, but he doesn't because he said I hit it 100 yards past him off the tee.
Exactly.
So he still plays in the men's competitions, but he says because that's where he's competitive. Whereas some people in that space are going into women's sports. We're seeing with Leah Thomas in the swimming. We've seen it with lots of women in the cycling. We've seen it in certain sports. I've got a picture here to show you that I seen this morning. I wasn't going to show you brought this up, but I took it for posterity. Of maybe you can see that. I'll give it to Noah so you put on.
Oh yeah.
Like
Andre the Giant with a bunch of
basically a women's basketball team, and this dude in there who's like,
this is the absurdity.
2 foot taller.
So I have no problem with people wanting to live their own lives. But I don't think anybody under the age of 25 should be allowed to go through any hormonal changes because it affects the maturity of the brain.
Grey matter, yeah.
There's a lot of important stuff that goes on in the brain up to the age of 25. And, it's also an attack on gay people because it's the eradication of gay, because, lesbians go through a tomboy phase. Where would Julian Clary still be Julian Clary? Yeah. Probably Juliette Clary, today, and the John Inmans of this world and Larry Grayson. That people go through phases, and some people end up just being straight guys who are going through a little phase. And I think it's so damaging and dangerous. But I can't really give an opinion on the transsexual, transgender movement until I have the scientific evidence of their brains, because we know that women, homosexuals, psychopaths and pedophiles all have different brain structures, and you can now tell this, right? So there's an element of nature, and then something happens in childhood, usually the nurture that triggers that nature. But you can, the guy who discovered, an American psychologist, discovered that he was a psychopath from his own brain patterns, and said, thank goodness I had a good childhood because I could have been very different. And you can now tell a pedophile's brain, and then the gay guys, the hypothalamus and so forth. I've never seen anything about the transsexual brain, and until I see that, I can't really give an educated opinion on how much of that is just a mental issue, how much of it is something that they're born with, or whether it's just some strange mental health issue. Because I think they have 6 times.
It must be. So it must be a mental disorder, because if you're in a body and your brain's telling you you're in the wrong body, that's not ordered.
Yeah, but if they're born with it, though, it's different, right? But we know, for example, that transsexuals have 6 times higher levels of autism, for example. Okay. And so a lot of this may not even be the fact that they think they're in the wrong body, but they're just confused, and they're then put on these irreversible paths by places like the Tavistock Centre in London, the old NHS centre, which is now closed down. But they were sort of guiding children down paths when they were misinterpreting. Callum, who we had on yesterday,
was outside. He was outside covering that. And that's the thing for me is, you can see if we're saying white males are getting discriminated against, certainly older white males, the term in TV land, I think, was white male and stale. And we can see active discrimination because the statistics back that up. It's not just an opinion anymore. It's now being backed up with numbers. And if you're a white man of a certain age, you might as well, you get life's boring, your job prospects are going down, you're being discriminated against, but all of a sudden, if you become Claire and you put a frock on, a bit of lippy, you're in vogue again, you're never out of work. So you can see how, yet some people may well be born, I do believe people are born with certain, a certain fate, whether that's to be 6 foot or 5 foot or ginger haired or dark haired or whatever it is. I believe you're born with, your nature. And then I do believe your environment nurtures that out of you for good or bad, depending on the lottery of life that we get. So I believe that people are born gay. I believe that you're born, and no matter what your feeling is, or you're surrounded by girls, you have this, calling inside to be slightly different. So I do, think there will be a genuine number of people out there who do feel they're in the wrong body.
That's the point. Yeah, that's what I was saying about Jan Morris and Jenner, because they're a tiny, infinitesimally small number. But what we've seen in the last 10 years, there's something else going on. Those aren't genuine, right? That's my point. I have sympathy and respect for those very few people who genuinely are dealing with this for whatever reason. But I think because this thing has been expanded to trans and now includes transvestites, that Canadian teacher with his whopping pair of breasts.
Oh, no, I put it on. Did you see the guy who was the lawyer?
No.
I put it on saying because I've obviously got a legal thing with libel with Jeremy Vine and Eni Luco. And I put on saying I'm going to hire this woman as my legal representative because it's a guy. I'll have to get you the picture of it. No, you got it there somewhere. Just put it in there for Rafe. He's a lawyer in America, but obviously he's a woman. But you have to see it to believe it. And he's in the courthouse. The thing for me is that's fine if you want to do that. And that's how, But I think the problem is when you go to kids who are confused. Not everybody's dead straight on what they want to be, and know that kids are really confused, especially if you're in a underprivileged or a single parent family, and you've got teachers in school who you look up to and maybe got a good relationship with you, who are saying, "You're confusion. You might be in the wrong body. You might need to." And I think for that to happen, I think that's child abuse. I think that's neglect from our representatives about a duty of care to that should be kept out of certainly young fertile minds. It shouldn't be allowed.
Well, yeah, it's a complete violation of the duty of care, and I think future generations are going to look back in horror about what we let people get away with in this country, and I think there should sort of really be criminal action, because more to deny a child their puberty, to cut off the breast and so forth. I just think I can't think of a worse way to damage a child's future into their adulthood. I mean, the mental anguish that so many of these people go through, because it doesn't give so many of them the peace and the contentment that they think it's going to get. Because, as I said, it turns out that they have other mental health issues, and this was just some sort of aspect of it.
And that's the thing. And then when you get, obviously, the biological males, saying the females and going into female sport and beating and taking female places. And if you say anything about that, you're transphobic or you're...
I think the solution is to have a transsexual category if you want to have that in some capacity. Now, not for every sport necessarily, but I think there should perhaps be their own leagues if they want to fight that, because it's just blatantly obvious. Once you've gone through puberty and had testosterone, the male body is clearly so much more powerful and fast on every level. And it makes some complete mockery. And this is the emperor's new clothes. I can't believe we're in a situation where somebody who's 3 feet taller and a foot wider than everybody else can get away with all of this. And quite often it's people, as you say, who probably aren't even trans, but they're number 862 in the world in weightlifting, and suddenly they turn over and they get the gold medal.
Well, that's what we've seen. That's what it attests to. That you got Leah Thomas in the swimming, who went from, I think, 300th ranked male in his first 2 years in the collegiate system to number 1 female. You've had cyclists who've done that. You've had people who've done that in weightlifting, as you point out, and there will be males out there who are just 400 in the world who'll realise, oh my God, I'm just nothing special, but I could be something special if I say me name's a female name and say I'm a woman now, and that's what we're seeing.
And sporting icons like Martina Navratilova, you get national treasures like Sharon Davies, who aren't on the right in any step, and yet they get all of this attack from the left and demonized for simply wanting to defend the rights of these women who have trained hard their entire life. The amount of dedication it takes to become a top league athlete is immense. And then to have some guy come over there, probably hasn't done a quarter of the training, but he just simply has those natural advantages and takes that away. I mean, the injustice is just so obvious. And when these international committees have these long discussions and debates about it, I mean, what's to debate? It's just so obvious.
Common sense.
Yes.
It's common sense. But unfortunately now, common sense is not common practice anymore. All right, a couple of things. This is interesting because I look at you're the historian, world history, and I look at the situation that's currently going on in the Middle East, and I don't want to get you drawn on it, Rafe, because we haven't got long enough. But I look back and I think that has always been, from the Crusades going down there, that has always been hostile, always been debated or fought over for as long as I can remember. And And when I look at it, I think, the religious centres, the Abrahamic religions, have always disputed that area from it being, a fertile crescent to the Greeks, the Romans, or the situation we've got going on there now, where you've got kind of Jewish population running into the Arab population that is obviously the dominant population in that region. Do you ever think we'll sort that out?
No, I don't think it's possible, because the tensions that exist there long predate the state of Israel, as you say. I mean, and I'm not taking sides here, because I think there are I don't think anyone comes out of this with a very good at all. But let's be clear here. There were pogroms against the Jewish people taking place long before Israel was created in Palestine. Right? There were Palestinian pogroms against the Jews long before Israel was created. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem met with Adolf Hitler, helped with the...
I've seen that picture this morning, weirdly.
Helped with the establishment of a Muslim SS brigade to kill Jews. The Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is an offshoot, essentially this is descendant, they were spreading the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and they translated Mein Kampf, Hitler's manifesto, into Arabic. They attended the Nuremberg rallies. I mean, this stuff is about not so much Jerusalem and not so much about modern politics. This is about the Islamic religion giving credence to the murder of Jews, or making it not only permissible, but encouraging it. That's why on October the 7th, you had Hamas militia terrorists phoning their father and mother saying, I just killed X number of Jews, as a source of pride, because this is the sort of stuff that gets you kudos with Allah, right? So once you understand that this is actually religiously sanctioned stuff that's going on, added to which you then have the politics, and yeah, sure, I mean, the treatment of the Palestinians hasn't been great, right? Which just adds fuel to the fire. When you put that all together, it's far too complicated to think you're going to have any successful solution to any of this. I just sort of lament the fact, if you believe in God or not, I think God had played a cruel trick by putting oil in that part of the world, because look at what happens in Africa with Rwanda and the Hutus and the Tutsis. No one cares about that, because there's no money there and they're poor. If there had been no oil in the Middle East, a lot of the Arab world, were Bedouins, right, basically, right? Into the UAE and so forth. They wouldn't have the power and all of this, and the Qataris funding terrorism, and the Saudis and so forth. And the world would be a lot more of a peaceful place had it not been for that awful deposit
of oil. Yeah, the black gold. Well, that was the thing. When you look at that fertile crescent, I'm talking about the Mediterranean, kind of North Africa, obviously Algeria, Morocco, obviously into Israel and Syria up that side, and then round into obviously the bottom end of the Balkan states there, and Greece, all the way across France, which was Gaul at the time, into Spain. That was all, the famous architecture in Spain's all Moor or Muslim. And the Crusades, from what my understanding of it, what I got taught in school anyway, the Crusades were seen as the liberators. They were going to free Christian lands from Muslim rule and Islamic, caliphates going into these countries and being the dominant force in the early part of those centuries. So, do you agree with that? Is that right? Were the Crusaders sent as a liberating force to these lands?
Well, a liberating or reconquering. The point was that both sides wanted to have ownership of it, right? This was the issue, because they all claimed to this holy land. Now, you could make an argument that at that point in history, there was more civilization in the Arab world and the Muslim world than there was in the European world. It's just a fact in terms of the cuisine and the fabrics and the architecture and the lifestyle and so forth. But yeah,
which the Islamic jihadists now have all ruined when they've gone into these, Palmyra and stuff like that.
It never developed beyond there. You know? I mean, the thing is, Western Europe only had like 5,000 years where it's become predominant. For 10,000 years, it's really been Asia that's been the center of the world.
Mesopotamia, Babylon, and all that. Yeah,
also China,
the Mongols,
India, and so
Khan.
forth. The great genius of the West is basically from the 1600s to today. We've somehow managed to dominate and conquer the world. And if we had more time, we could go into the genius of the Western mind and why it's the Western brain, the Occidental brain, is different to the Oriental brain in very different ways in terms of how you react with the world and interact with it and so forth. But yeah, I mean, my own ancestor, my grandmother was called Jablonowski, and my great-great-grandfather led the cavalry charge against the Muslims at the Siege of Vienna, 1683, which was the last time that Islam threatened Europe, when they were besieging Vienna, and the Austrian Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope asked for the King of Poland to come and help save them, because King Sobieski was known as the hammer of the Turks. So from the east and from the south, Islam has always threatened Europe, and so this clash of civilizations is as old as the
it's
ages.
nothing new.
It's as old as Islam. Yeah,
it's nothing new, and that's the thing that, and I've got so much I could talk to you about, Rafe. But when I see the key thing for it, just in my lifetime, born 82, 1990, the Balkan conflict, which we're talking about, Yugoslavia breaks up. Obviously, the Berlin Wall comes down, the Soviet Iron Curtain starts regressing. Ultimately, to the end of that, the end of the century is when, obviously, Yeltsin, Putin hand over, the Soviet Union collapses. And the leaders of the free world become the Americans. Obviously, 1990, UN's in there as a peacekeeping force in Yugoslavia. Not long after that's the first Iraq invasion, when Saddam goes into Kuwait or whatever. 2001's the Twin Towers come down. America now into Iraq and Syria, Afghanistan, Syria. And I look at that American foreign policy. And that's a danger for me. When you talked before about Blair, and I know Alistair Campbell, he's a big Burnley fan and obviously Blair's advisor. We couldn't have, we're so in step with NATO or the Americans that whatever they get involved in. So if anything goes wrong in the Middle East or goes wrong in Ukraine, and the Americans decide to go to war, we're coupled up to them whether we fucking like it or not. And that's my big concern. I really worry about American foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, well, Blair and Bush have so much to answer for in terms of the rapid decline of the West, because, of course, and it was such an ignorant and ridiculous position to have this liberal interventionist policy, right, where they thought they could just go to the Middle East, sprinkle some democracy powder, add water and mix, and you would have democracy born overnight in these places. And wherever they've gone, of course, has ended up being a complete car crash, right? From Iraq, look at what Cameron and Sarkozy did in Libya. It took us hundreds of years to develop our liberal democracy, and our institutions developed based upon the specific situation in this country. So it's a uniquely British democracy. There's a uniquely Canadian democracy. Everything evolves organically. You can't just impose from above our Western symbols and traditions. And the level of ignorance in America and in Britain about this, I think we will always look upon, because it's completely weakened the Western world order, if you want to call it that. And you just now have to look at the power that Iran and Russia and China now has. It's directly relevant to the fact that the West completely weakened itself. America's become isolationist in terms of the population because of these bad experiences. And I was always opposed to the Iraq War. I remember at the time, I was only in my early 20s, but I said, if America's going to go there without any UN mandate, then it will lose all of the moral high ground. Every subsequent war that another country does, they will just say, well, you guys didn't, you guys went in there. And of course, Russia and China have done precisely that. They said, how can you lecture us from look at what you've done in Iraq and so forth? I mean, and it was clear to me from the beginning, for example, that Saddam Hussein didn't have weapons of mass destruction to launch on Europe. This dossier, 45 minutes. I thought, why would he attack Western superpowers, nuclear powers, who would eradicate him in a minute? There was no common sense there. This was clearly done because of Halliburton and American business interests wanting to go into Iraq. Whereas I think Afghanistan was a legitimate war to fight, Iraq was clearly done for ulterior motives to continue George Bush Sr.'s war, which he didn't finish off and get those contracts. And I've been to Dubai, to the Prime Minister and the President's office, and Halliburton is one floor down below them in the office block. It's
money. Follow the money. Follow the money. Rafe, I could talk to you all day. As I say, I've got all sorts on there, American foreign politics, ours, but I'm mindful of the time. And as I say, hopefully I can come and continue this at some point with you. But I'm so thankful for you taking the time out today. I've really enjoyed talking with you. That's been Common Sense with me, Joey Barton, and Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Thank you so much. As I say, mate, fascinating. A little story I want to tell you was when you mentioned Cassius Clay, I made a little note of it. A good friend of mine was a jockey, Martin Dwyer, and he rode in the French Derby. So I was out on a night out with him on the Saturday, and he said, so we've gone on had a couple of beers and a bit of food, and he says, I'm riding in the French Derby tomorrow. Do you want to come? I'm flying over a little pond upper across tomorrow, and I'm riding this horse. So I'd never been to Shanty, so I get in the plane with them. Little private airfield, not a private jet, it's just a little puddle-upper with the propellers. We're into France, get into France. There's the racing going on, Shanty. I'm like, wow, this is incredible. The racing starts, and he says, you're going to have to sit with, I'm riding for these this American family from Kentucky. You'll have to sit with them for your lunch and have dinner. Yeah, no problem. So I go on this big long table. It's about 30 people over from America. And his name was Joseph Clay. So I get talking with them, Kentucky family. And they had like a family member who was like a priest and all that. Like they were proper quirky American family. And we get chatting away, and the dad's there, but he's about 85. He's like not functioning, but he's the head of the family. And then there's the young son there, Joseph, and we get chatting. Turns out Joseph says, I've had to leave my wife in the States because she's just had a baby. So she couldn't fly, blah, blah, blah. I've just had a little son first time, and I've called him Cassius. So I went, Cassius Clay. And he started laughing. He went, yeah. He said, my family used to own the plantation where the Clay family came from. Oh. And when emancipation and slavery was abolished, all the slaves obviously went into the population and didn't have surnames. So a lot of them took the plantation owners or the name as the surname. And when Cassius Clay shook off Cassius Clay and became Muhammad Ali, he was off. I think he was off that. He was from that lineage. And then Joe's named his son after him. And then I've ended up calling my boy Cassius, not for any. I don't know. We love the name, and I love Muhammad Ali, but we ended up calling him. And weirdly, I always laughing because when you brought him up, I thought, fucking hell, like it's such a small world. You know what I mean? I'm a kid off a working class estate in Ayton, and then you go to the races with one of your pals, and you bounce into somebody who, slave owner. Like they're the people you should be chasing down for repatriations. You know?
Well, what a lovely sort of conclusion to that they've actually named their child after him. So you're giving a slave name to their own descendant, which is
it shows you how incredible people, from meager beginnings can actually have a massive effect. And I think, for me, when I look at it, and that's why I take my hat off to you, you're out there fighting a good fight, spreading a great message about history and stuff that I think certainly for my generation, it inspires me to go, you know what, if we all get together, we keep conversing. We've got to change the rhetoric out there. This is a good country with good people, and if we don't fight and protect that with every sinew of our being, we'll end up with what we've got now, which is a fucking laughing stock. So Rafe, thank you so much for travelling up, mate. As I say, delighted to spend time here, and nice to put a face to the social media profile.
A pleasure. It was great fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.